Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast that explores how to create meaningful art experiences in the built environment. I'm your host, Martha Weidman, the CEO and co-founder of 9.Arts, and I'm happy to bring to you all today Albus Brooks, executive at Milender White, and someone that I've known for quite a few years and have really admired his ability to bring private sector responsibility to the table in building more inclusive cities. Now, Albus and I have one thing in common, and that is that we both played football. That's a story for another day. But Albus's career lasted much longer than mine. So stay tuned and listen in as we talk about this connection between race, real estate, and building equity into communities. It's an exciting show, and if you haven't already, make sure you also check out our state-of-the-art report at 9.arts.com. There you can download and learn more about the return on investment when you create truly involved communities that impact art and culture in the spaces that we build. You can learn more about Albus on LinkedIn and follow what they're doing at Milender White. Stay tuned and enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm really excited to have a special guest with us today. We have Albus Brooks, the Vice President of Business Development and Public Affairs and a shareholder at Milender White. And Albus is creating a big impact on the built environment in a number of different ways. We're excited to have him on the show today and hear more about his perspective. So, Albus, thank you so much for being here.
Martha, what's up? Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's an honor to be with you. We've known each other for a while when I was in the public life and now private life, and partnering on projects and making Denver awesome. So thank you for having me on.
Well, Albus, really pleased that you're here, and I'm just excited for our audience to hear more about what you're doing to change things in the real estate sector. But before we get into that, let's start with a little bit about you. Can you tell our listeners more about who you are, what you do, and why it matters?
Yeah. So Albus Brooks from Los Angeles, California. I was born and raised out in Southern California. Made my way to Colorado by way of the University of Colorado. I went to college there. I played for football when we were great. For the Colorado Buffaloes. And, some injuries kept me from pursuing my dream of being in the NFL and got started in community service. Really was drawn to raising up particularly young Black men in our community who had been disenfranchised from a ton of different opportunities of the city. And so I did that organization, nonprofit, for about 8 to 9 years, created another one called Issachar Center for Urban Leadership, where we connected first generation folks of color in the neighborhoods to college and pay for their 4-year journey. Throughout that, began to get passionate about politics and got into politics and making sure that we were seeing equity and economic mobility all throughout the city of Denver. I was elected as city council and Denver City Council president. And as I was doing that, I got really passionate about land use and urban planning and making sure that we're building inclusive cities and development and construction. And, I served there for about a decade. And now I'm with Milender White, which is a construction and development company operating in Southern California and all throughout Colorado, mostly focused in the multi-key space. We do a lot of multifamily, a lot of affordable housing, student housing, senior housing. We do a lot of commercial. We work together on Union Station here in Denver. And so, really excited to be in this space and make a difference.
Well, I love the way that you talk about your work, Albus, because there's not a lot of people in the real estate industry and in the business leadership community that think the way that you do. And, before the show started, we were talking about how race and real estate are connected. And as a group that's creating the built environment, sometimes you don't realize what an incredible multi-generational impact that can have on our communities. So what are some of the things that you think about when you're approaching your work and how you go about finding projects, how you select them, and then how do you build in a way that's creating equity?
Yeah, so that's so good. First of all, whenever I tell a lot of folks who are in the real estate industry, it's like when we step onto the scene, there is a historical context that has already taken place that is influencing our decision making. And I always talk about redlining in America. I talk about redlining in cities, and that's basically taking the goods and services away from a certain community because of the color of the skin, and real estate was based in that. I mean, that's how we did real estate in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, right? Until redlining was outlined. I mean, redlining is in federal documents. We redline African Americans out of communities by deeming them and not allowing loans to come to them because they were seen as folks that could not pay back their loans, right? And so what we did was devalue certain parts of our city while and put goods and services to the other parts of our city and devalue the other part. And now we're starting to see gentrification where we go back in and invest in those parts of the city and see a greater value return. And so if you don't have that basic understanding and you're just developing, you are actually a part of the problem, right? Because it's that snowball effect of horrible policies, racist policies that we've got to understand to turn the tide and do things differently. So you said, how do you build equity in your projects? Well, first of all, we want to be a part of building inclusive cities, right? And one of the ways that we do that, we know that the city can't do that on its own, the state can't do that, but the private sector needs to have a responsibility. I love business, and the ethos of business for me is community. It's not profit, right? Yes, you will make a profit, but really it's the understanding, the molding, the coming together of what the community is and what the community needs. And we really believe that. And so 30% of our projects are affordable housing. We make it's not just what we do, it's what we believe. That if we're going to truly build inclusive cities, we've got to have affordable housing projects. And right now in 5 Points, we are doing one of 5 Points Denver, one of the more innovative homeless housing projects where there are homeless housing units and wraparound services on 4 to 5 of the floors. And on 3 floors, there's indigent care units, meaning that there are homeless individuals who are receiving services at a Denver Health or the hospital, and they have nowhere to go. They're going back to the streets and they get sick again. Well, we create these units that actually have that care so they can get cared for, they can get healthy, and then move upstairs and wrap around services. And so it's the first of its kind in the country. We're working with Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, but those are the type of projects and opportunities we get excited about.
That's awesome. I mean, I think about what's happening across America and a lot of big cities in dealing with homeless challenges. And homelessness, it's the result of missing a few catch points, a few rungs on the ladder. There are so many opportunities that we could help people before they get down to that bottom place. And what you're doing in building affordable housing and in building care services as a part of that seems like a great way to catch people before they end up in a situation that's so hard to come out of.
Definitely, right? I mean, to be able to have a home, to make sure that you have security in housing, I mean, is one of the biggest issues. And I think we don't have enough housing, period, right? People are housing insecure, meaning that they spend over 30% of their paycheck on housing because land prices are continuing to rise and wages are not keeping pace. So, how are people supposed to live in these communities? And so, we feel like we can be, a part of the solution. Is a big issue to deal with. I dealt with it for many years on city council, so I understand the macro issues. But I believe that each of us, in our own context, if we get passionate about this and get a vision for our own companies to be a part of the solution, we can make a real impact.
I fully agree with it, and I'd love to share with you a story about a project that we're working on in Seattle, and then I would also love to hear more about any specific examples of a particular project you're doing that you feel like is making a really big impact in this way. For us, one thing that we're working on is in the central district of Seattle. It was a historically redlined district, and it has gentrified really rapidly. We've been working with a developer there, Lake Union Partners. They're building an apartment complex. And in the base level of the apartment complex, there's going to be a Black art and culture space. And it's going to
Mm,
be run by Vivian Phillips, who grew up in that neighborhood, and feature Black artists, Black music, Black merch, and really support entrepreneurship from the community that has been driven out over time. And so that was the initial concept, was how do we help Vivian build this business plan? But as we were going through it, what we found is, in that scenario that we initially wrote or came up with, she's still paying rent, right? She's still paying rent. Rents can rise. We didn't have a rent control set up. So we were going, how do we actually make sure that this is part of the community and that they have a way of owning a part of this place? So we worked with the development team to recode the building so that the first level could be condominiums. And now Vivian has a purchase option that she'll be able to exercise. And I'm excited to say they just finished their capital raise to fund construction. But this is now a space that she will own, that this group will own. And because we were able to do that in that one space, that was really the driver. Now that entire first floor has been condoed out, and now it's going to be all Black business owners on the entire first floor. There's going to be a
that's awesome.
restaurant, hair salon, a bar. So I'm just so excited that, sometimes you think you're doing one thing that's like this big, and it's actually, there's a ripple effect around that. And so that space is going to be called Art Noir. It opens next year, and excited to share more about that with the world. But I'd love to know from your perspective, how do you, there's the homelessness issue, but then there's also the issue of like having that long-term wealth building strategy, right?
You're starting to speak my language, and first of all, that's exceptional of what you're doing, and that is what needs to happen. That's the change. When people say, "What is equity?" When we talk about social equity, and I talk about that in real estate all the time. We know equity well when when we need to build a project, right? We know how to raise equity, but when it comes to social equity, we don't even understand what it means. And what I call equity is, if you understand all the barriers in society that we've set up through racist policies, equity is removing the barriers, and it's not equality, right? It's not saying, okay, everybody's equal, because no, those barriers have set people back. Equity is saying, now, how do we move ahead? How do we say this will be this space will be Black run, right? We are going to focus on Black businesses because we recognize that this is a red line community, and these folks are at a disadvantage. They are now underrepresented in the business atmosphere because of these reasons. And I talk about that all the time. I think it's some of the most important things that we do. So we talk about equity with our company and our hiring goals, making sure that we're hiring women and people of color. We talk about equity in our hiring of trade partners, women and minority-owned businesses, making sure that they are a part of our trades. We talk about that in hiring trade people, folks who've been down on their luck and been in jail and have struggled, making sure that we can build wealth for them. I'm really trying to educate folks in the African American Latino community that actually construction is a wealth building industry. And
Absolutely.
I am hiring folks right out of college as field engineers at $70,000 to $80,000 a year, right? And if you're with the company for a certain amount of time, you will have an opportunity to be an owner in the company, right? And so we're an employee-owned company, and so those are the things that the wealth building tactics are so important. And I think folks need to really change their thinking around those issues so that we can really move the needle. A rapper by the name of Nipsey Hussle, unfortunately, passed, and he was. I have this picture of him on this. I do talks around racism in real estate and building social equity and all these things, and I have a picture of him where he's doing a ribbon cutting, and at that ribbon cutting, he bought a strip mall in Crenshaw. That strip mall 5 years earlier, he was selling drugs, and the owner of that strip mall was calling the cops on him and harassing him and things like that. And yes, he shouldn't have been selling drugs, but the point was, Nipsey looked and said, "This guy's not even from our community. He doesn't even understand our community. He's calling the police on me." So instead of getting mad and getting upset about gentrification, he has a line where he says, "Gentrify your own hood." And he bought that building. He bought that entire strip mall. And he's at this ribbon cutting, with his clothes on and just laughing like, man, I changed the game. And that's what we want to do from a community perspective, is start educating the community on land use issues, on real estate development, on construction, all of these issues, so that we can equip them to be their own developers and community developers to change their community.
Well, and you've just made some really big picture adjustments to your business and your company with some of that strategy in mind. I'd love for you to share more with the audience about that transformation you went through and how you came to those conclusions.
Yeah, so we are an employee-owned company, as Milender White, and we're looking to expand. We want to grow. We want to grow in our product types and our disciplines. And we're in conversations with a company, a very large company out of Canada called Graham. And we just merged with Graham. And this will really allow Milender White, number one, to, I think, grow our footprint, still operate as Milender White, but more importantly, it achieves our goal of becoming a 100% employee-owned company. This Graham model really makes sure that the shareholders are the people who are working for them. And that's really exciting for me because that is a game changer. When you can really take it to the next level and make sure that your employees are a part of the success of the company, you change their lives forever. And so that's exciting and gives me even more, I think, vision and passion for recruitment of folks who have been historically kept out of construction.
Well, I appreciate that you brought up recruitment because so much of the business world right now is talking about labor shortage and hiring, right? And what are the challenges facing that? And we went through an overhaul of our hiring and onboarding and engagement and retention processes during the recession and put some policies in place to just make our practice more inclusive. We have a scenario that we use. So rather than looking at someone's resume, we give you an example of what it's going to be like to be in this role and respond back. And then people get more invested in what the job is like. And we have a more unbiased opinion of how we pick people. So we use that scenario. We use a social platform for hiring. So it's not one person making the decision. You have multiple people making the decision. Now we have our salaries have been posted. Now that's, of course, a policy in Colorado, but not every state has a policy that you have to post your salary. But statistics show if you post your salary that more women are going to apply and also be comfortable negotiating their rates. And a lot of times in business, we say women might apply, but let me just be clear too. A lot of times people talk about women having opportunities, and we assume that that means white women. And, really you have to look across the spectrum. Are all women getting an opportunity here? Are Black women, Latino women getting an opportunity? And how can you create more comfort in your business for those women to succeed, and not just succeed in the role that they're in, but actually grow and become the executives who are running the business. So taking some of those steps, and then we've recently increased our parental leave policy, so it's gender neutral. You can take with your PTO 16 weeks off, and I mean, think about that. How can your staff have a life, right? Have a life and be contributing amazing workforce. But how do you build those policies? So when I look at those things that you can do and feel firsthand how that's impacted a small business like ours, we've been able to more than double our staff in the past year, and we have the most talented team that we've ever had. So I hear about the labor shortage, but and I hear sometimes business leaders saying, "Oh, I don't have enough diverse candidates applying," and then I just think you're not trying hard enough. You know, it's just, you really have to think about what is it that you're projecting or doing out there, and how do you shift your way of thinking. But how have you revisited or thought about recruitment strategy, and how are you guys using those kinds of strategies to your advantage in a market like this?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought this up. I get this question more than anybody from primarily white executives. How in the heck do I get diverse candidates? And these executives are extremely successful, have overcome many challenges, but when it comes to this issue, they feel stuck, which is curious to me because I kind of identify with you that this is actually not rocket science. It's just shifting our thinking. And so we did a very simple shift, and we in 1 year recruited and hired more people of color and women than we did white males. I mean, that has never happened in our, and we just did one shift, and that was during the pandemic. And what we did was just go into different pools. Traditional construction folks in our industry go after graduates from CSU, Kansas State, Iowa State, and we've just been doing that year after year. But do we know that there's a construction management school half the size of CSU, but it's growing, and 50% minority, and that's Metro State. And so we created a pipeline of, and we've hired 10 folks from there in the last, I believe it was about a year now. And we started to do that with each of our business units. So we do it here in Denver. We do it in the Metro Denver. We have some other areas where we do. In California, we have Long Beach Poly, Cal State LA. All of those schools we focus on for that reason specifically, so that we can hire and make sure that we have a diverse talent pipeline. Most folks in construction see that diversity on the trade side. What I'm talking about is on the management side. How do we make sure that we have that diversity? And so I'm very proud to say in our California office, we're nearly at 50%. And here we want to represent the community, which is, almost, there's in the city of Denver, we are 40% people of color, right? And so our workforce should mirror that. And that's what we're working towards.
Well, one thing we haven't spent a lot of time on is culture. We've talked about community, and we've talked about marginalized communities and how to shift that. And one thing that has impacted marginalized community is people coming in and actually stealing or owning parts of the culture, right? Our business is focused on how do we actually take those young BIPOC entrepreneurs and provide opportunities so that they can reap the benefits of the culture and creativity that they make. So when you're looking at the built environment, when you're looking at city planning, how do you think about culture and community engagement, and how to really shift the way that people envision a place based on those efforts?
This is a tough one. I think a lot of times, developers and folks in the construction industry do not look beyond the construction fence, right? They're just focused on their silo, their project, and when it fails and when there's issues, they wonder why. I think you have to have a outside of the post, outside of the construction site perspective, that just when you are going through entitlements for the project, pre-construction, you're doing um, you're doing pre-construction and you're doing outreach in the community. You're doing a historical understanding. You are reaching out and asking people what they want to see. And that actually even comes before. That's in design, right? You're allowing people to be a part of the design. Typically, this only happens when people need approval, community approval, or a city council approval, or a zoning change. But what if this was just a part of how we did things? What if this is how we built projects? And so it's something that I'm not every project is like this, but it's something that I really want to see, and something we've really been looking at, especially in the 5 Points with a project called the Rissonian. And many people know what the Rissonian, but just to educate listeners real quick, in the 40s and 50s, this community was redlined in 5 Points. It was known as the Harlem of the West. This is where there was just a Black Renaissance that was taking place. That even though it was redlined, it was almost like this community just began to thrive with Black businesses, Black art, Black music, and some famous musicians would come and play downtown at the white establishments. But then they had to go back to 5 Points to stay. And this hotel called the Rissonian was a place that Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, all of these famous jazz musicians would just play after hours. And it's been, unfortunately, run down, defunct, closed for over 30 years. And we have the opportunity now to revitalize that place, to make sure that it is a hotel. There is going to be a museum. There is going to be a speakeasy where, we can go after hours and listen to music. And we're really excited about that. But we're not doing it as an internal deal. It's a much more external process for us, where we've involved the community. There's the Blair Caldwell Black Research Museum, where we found some people who are cousins and grandsons and granddaughters of these incredible individuals from 5 Points, to tell the story and help us see, how do we revitalize this incredible Jew in the community. And it's working. And so I'm excited to see this come to life. But I think that is so important in keeping the culture, right? And helping people relive and experience the culture in this place. And so it's not just a place that's going to be what architects and and developers and construction folks want it to be. It's what the community remembers it was and what it could be in the future.
Creative placemaking is a concept and a term that's becoming more mainstream now to describe things like this, right? Places where you play or engage, or you feel that heartbeat of a city. Have you experienced that anywhere that you felt like, wow, this is really something special, because you can feel it?
Well, I especially feel like that I feel like that in DC a lot. There are specific areas in DC that really inspire me. I think being a being a political science nerd, I think I just love that. But then you start to see a little bit of the culture of DC, especially the Black culture, the food. You get all the political energy in there, but then you got this Black culture. You get the food, you get the music. This place called Busboys and Poets in DC really makes me feel like, wow, look at this place. It's so much energy. There's so much connectivity. Who am I bumping into? There's a senator There's an artist off the street. This is a spoken word, individual. Like, it's just great. And those are the type of collisions we want to be able to create as city builders, right? Like, how do we create those collisions that you wouldn't ordinarily get, that you wouldn't ordinarily run into? And that's the thing that inspires me.
So when you walk into Busboys and Poets, aside from the people, and maybe it is the people, but what is it that you see? Can you describe that a little bit more for our listeners, like what you see when you walk in that place?
Well, when I walk in, I can feel the energy. And I don't know if many people have walked in the place. It's not a cookie cutter type of, location. It is a ton going on. It's a restaurant. There is a notice I say conscious bookstore there on a lot of free thought, a lot of progressive ideas, all kinds of in the book. So you got the bookstore there, you got the restaurant going, you have a room in the back where it's a community center. So there's spoken word, there's meetings about important issues. So you're just feeling all of this energy, and then you hear music that's kind of, harmonically bringing everything together, and it's not cacophonous. You know what I mean? It's not like, okay, where there's a bookstore here, no, it all works together. It's all a part of this amazing place, and I go there at least when I'm there. I at least eat there 3 times. It doesn't matter how long I've been there, just because it's like I want to feel that. I want to be a part of this. I'm a true urbanist, and I love things like that, and I love people who you got to think outside the box. You got to take risks, because it's a tremendous risk in a very political town to have all that kind of stuff going on. But they are always sold out, and they're always booked because people want to experience. They want to have experience.
I think that's what we're all trying to do, right? We're all trying to create places that are generative to the communities that we serve. And, some of the times when you initially try and explain what we're trying to accomplish to people, first thing is, right, it's not cookie cutter. It's not something you can just buy out of a catalog, right? This has to be truly thoughtful. You have to think beyond the perceptions of what you're looking at in the box or your floor plan or your construction fence, and think, who are the people that are going to be influenced by this place, and how do we make a real impact? And I'm excited about what you're doing at the Rossonian. We have one of the best spoken word scenes in the country here in Denver. So, maybe we get Slam Nuba in there and start building this out so that we can go over and have our own version of that here in the Rocky Mountains. Love it. Well, before we close out, I'd love to just ask a couple more questions about trends and where you think things are going for the future. Do you see any major impacts or challenges that will affect the way you work, and how does that shift the way that you approach things?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're in this pandemic, that for a raging extrovert like myself, I'm dying. I was dying. Now we're out and about a little bit more, but I think that has caused a ton of shift. One, and you talked about this earlier, and how we think about workplace, showing up to the office, things like that, work-life balance. We are making some huge decisions in a 4-day-a-week work week, and making sure folks get off, making sure on a Wednesday people are on the slopes and things like that, because it's very competitive out there, as you know, in the labor force, and we are making some real changes in that. And so I think you are going to see some of the more flexible work-life balances that we've ever seen before, and that's hard for people who are not taught to think like that, and can't pivot in this area. So I think labor is going to be very interesting. And right now, the power is in the labor's hands, right? Like, they are making decisions like, it's the same price, but actually I'll have a better work-life balance if I choose A, right? So I think that's really interesting. I think this isn't anything new, but I think it may be new to folks who don't keep track of this Generation Z and millennial in the work who are now the largest workforce. They will no longer tolerate, you know, work environments that are not inclusive. They will no longer tolerate work environments that don't have meaning and purpose and calling. So if you have your employees doing work, they will quit. If that's all they're focused on and you don't give them a vision for why this is impacting the world and why this is bringing meaning, they will quit. And so we're doing a lot of work around, you know, changing how even a construction company, we talk about building. It's beyond building. We talk about we're building inclusive cities, right? It's something much bigger than just inside the fence posts. And so there are a lot of things like that I'm really, I think is really interesting. And if you're not on the cutting edge of that, you're going to lose people. And I think lastly, I think we're in this interesting, you know, to get a little bit more macro and talk about cities. I think we're in this interesting place in cities where right now we are seeing, because of the pandemic, you know, obviously a big homeless issue, a big drug issue in many cities. And I think, you know, with the election of a good friend, Mayor Eric Adams out of New York City, he just won last night. I think you're going to see a balancing of how we see city building. He was a former police officer, African American. There's all these weird things that he has with his background that he's bringing to city building. That it is important that we have a police force. I mean, but at the same time, how do we have community policing? That it is important that we have business and development. But at the same time, how do we make sure that there is equity in our building? So you're going to see a lot of that coming, and you're going to see it kind of thread in a really powerful way. There are, you know, there's definite sides to this, very, very progressive voices that think that there should be no development. And there's other sides that feel like there should be every development and people just have to deal with it and raising costs and things like that. But there are leaders now who are coming in a very concise message, a very centrist message for cities, threading the needle of how do we truly build cities and keep people employed and having a home and things like that. And so I'm excited about the future. And those who are willing to pivot and lean into it are going to enjoy it.
That's awesome. Well, Albus, is there anything else you want to share with me or our listeners?
Martha, thank you for this. This is encouraging. It's so fun to watch your meteoric rise in this space and really helping individuals like me think about just have another perspective, to have this third eye towards art and culture and making sure that the human experience is thriving at its best level. I appreciate your leadership and I appreciate your work, and thank you for having me on.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Albus. I think the feeling is mutual, and I love that we are collectively in different ways working to build communities that will thrive into the future. So thank you so much for being on the show. And I'm sure some of our listeners are going to want to learn more about you and what you're doing. So where can people find you?
You know, I'm on all the social media platforms. Albus Brooks. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and obviously Facebook. ALBUSBROOKS. And you can check out my website at albusbrooks.com.
Awesome. Albus, thank you so much for being an inspiring leader and for showing us a little glimpse into the future of where things are going in real estate and construction, and how to build better communities and companies. Really appreciate your time and insight on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Martha.
Well, thanks for tuning in for today's episode of ... And to keep up with our latest, be sure to subscribe to 9.Arts on YouTube or to ... wherever you get your podcasts. Do you have feedback or ideas for the show? Well, email us at letstalk@9.arts.com. And until next time, on behalf of everyone at 9.Arts, here's wishing you some inspiring art experiences.